好，大家给推荐大家看一段视频，这个视频呢也是刚才讲解那个复杂性对应的一个视频，BBC 的一个英文的视频，就是感受一下啊，就是课间感受一下。
What has ultimately always stood behind our conviction that the world is a knowable and therefore controllable place is that the mathematics which governs the world said so. But what happens when that assurance is taken away? When the mathematics begins to tell us that perhaps the world isn't as predictable and controllable as we once thought, that our old assurances might be wrong.
Financial markets across the globe are in turmoil this afternoon as another big bank collapses.
And when the disasters of today begin to fuel fears for tomorrow.
There is a growing awareness of the fact that the world in which we live is unpredictable, chaotic.
One of the most powerful hurricanes on record hits the Gulf Coast.
Katrina is now ploughing its way north. We thought we could control everything. Now we feel we can control nothing. And that comes out of this notion that there is chaos in the world, that you can never know enough to be able to really predict it, let alone control it.
From simple models and the mathematics which control them is coming a challenge to our old worldview.
There's a simple human need to have a forecast about the future. There's a deep desire, if you like, to be able to control the future, and a very, very deep reluctance to accept the really modern advances in mathematics, which suggests that there are high levels of fundamental unpredictability.
America's mortgage crisis fears for the future of two huge companies after their shares reels from the impact of the latest hurricane. Hundreds of lives have been lost.
It used to be that our dreams of the future were a bright and open place. What happened to us that our vision of the future is no longer bright, but dark?
People are really, really hit and they're really depressed and there's nowhere to turn. Where did it all begin? You know, what's the answer? It's like it was a big design, it's a global type of effect.
Well, you have anxiety attacks, you have nightmares. Who can we blame this on? Anybody? Can anybody tell me?
The key kind of psychological experience of anxiety is a fear that something awful is going to happen, a kind of dread and uncertainty.
This film is a history of that anxiety and the mathematics which created it.
We're in the midst of a huge cultural change. Only 50 years ago, experts had a whole vocabulary for describing the world, which already sounds very foreign to us. They talked about a command and control economy, of engineering the weather, of central planning. No one today thinks the world can be described in such terms. Today, we're much more likely to talk about disorder, instability, turbulence, tipping points, the butterfly effect. This is the vocabulary which has come to us from the mathematics of the last 50 years. And it is this mathematics which is in the process of completely altering our understanding of the fundamental nature of the world we live in, and I believe is giving us a whole new vocabulary for talking about our anxieties about that world.
Looking back, we can see what was not obvious then. Those mathematical discoveries, which would eventually undermine the optimistic view of the world and set us on our way to the anxieties of today. The mathematical roots of our modern anxiety have their beginnings here, in Paris, in 1885. The city was preparing to celebrate the optimistic worldview of science and reason, There was to be a grand exhibition to celebrate progress and democracy. It was the centenary of the Republic. And towering over it all was to be the world's tallest building, a symbol of everything that they believed in, a perfect hymn in iron to the rational and ordered world-view of Newtonian science. Newtonian mathematics describes a place that follows clear rules of cause and effect, which make it predictable and therefore ultimately controllable. In the hands of one of Newton's greatest followers, the French atheist and mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace, it became a set of beliefs about the nature of everything, an almost religious belief that the world could be understood as a machine.
There was this strong notion that the world should be mechanistic and deterministic.
David Rouelle is a theoretical physicist and one of the principal discoverers of chaos mathematics.
Newton and Laplace saw the world as a machine, and everybody did, to the extent that they were scientists. They wanted to have determinism.
In a mechanistic world, nothing happens without a cause. Nothing is unexplainable. In this world, if you understood the mathematical rules, you understood the world. Everything was predictable. Science could guarantee safety and progress.
So that you could have this Laplacian, what was sometimes called a sort of clockwork view of the universe, where, you know, if enough people did enough sums, then everything would be understood, because they thought they knew how systems behaved. They thought everything did, in the end, behave nicely. They knew disasters happened. They were perfectly well aware of that. But actually, they thought the mathematics would be able to explain it completely.
And this was ultimately what underpinned their optimism and ours, and made the future seem so open. But beneath the surface of optimism that the world was conquerable and controllable was an undercurrent of worry that perhaps the world was not as tame and safe as they wished to believe. Right at the heart of Newtonian mechanics was a problem which, if it couldn't be solved, endangered the whole belief that ultimately everything was mathematically predictable, because it was to do with the one thing Newton was supposed to have absolutely solved: the orbits of the solar system. See, the genius of Newton's equations is that if you have two bodies, one orbiting the other, like the Earth going around the Sun, the equations of motion allow you to tell the exact nature of their orbits and to predict precisely where both bodies will be at any time in the future. The claim of Newton and Laplace is that you simply scale that up and you can predict everything about the universe.
Once you've got a solution, you can say to me, well, I'd like to know where that body is going to be at such and such a time. And that could be at any time in the future or any time in the past. I can just plug in the numbers, the time that you want, and out will come the answer. And it'll give me essentially the coordinates and velocity of where that body will be.
The same mathematics that governed the orbits of the planets also governed motion here on Earth. It was the bedrock of Newtonian science that if two objects began in almost identical orbits, they would continue in almost identical orbits, the difference between them never growing. So if you knew the orbit of one, you could predict the orbit of the other. And in theory, that's fine. In practice, what happens is that as soon as you add just one more body, just three, suddenly you cannot solve the equations and you cannot predict anything. Every major mathematician from Newton onwards had hoped that one day what they called the three-body problem would be solved. But then in 1889, a French mathematician called Henri Poincaré discovered there was no way of predicting the orbits. In some cases, no matter how similar the paths were at the start, if there was any difference at all, eventually one would fly off on a different and totally unexpected and unpredictable path. Prediction, Poincaré lamented.
He saw something behaving in a way that he didn't expect, and he realized it was to do with the initial conditions and what we now call sensitivity to initial conditions. And that's what was unexpected, that if you just tweaked something a very little bit, you could get a huge difference in outcomes. That was where he actually discovered what we now call mathematical chaos.
Poincaré had glimpsed a profound truth about the planets and their orbits. What disturbed him was that he realized this unpredictable behavior might be present throughout nature. He realized a small disturbance, no more than the flapping of a butterfly's wings, might be enough to create a storm where none was predicted. This was a very different world to Newton's.
And I think the interesting thing is the fact that he was so himself, even Poincaré, the sort of greatest mathematician around at the time, was still immersed in that view of thinking that things would all work out nicely, that everything in the end behaved properly. And he was horrified when he discovered the way these solutions worked out, and you could get this what we now call chaotic behavior. It was quite shocking to him.
Poincaré's discovery struck at the root of a view of the world which neither he nor his contemporaries were yet willing to give up.
The world in which he was living and moving was still very much one that was embedded in that Laplacian view. This very strange behaviour that he discovered was sort of glossed over by the commentators.
People were just not ready to hear that their world was not as orderly as they'd always believed. Then in 1914, in Sarajevo, a tiny disturbance did push the whole world system from its course. This was the tiny disturbance that started the uncontrollable storm. In hindsight, we can see how appallingly prescient Poincaré's discovery had been. But at the time, the rest of the world was just not ready to listen. They were still determined to believe that they lived in a Newtonian world, where even the complexities of human affairs could be predicted, and the war would be over by Christmas.
好，我们现在回到课上，大家回到课上了，然后我们首先解答一下大家的一些问题。就在上节课里有一个同学提的点还是非常有趣的，包括就是说我总结一下，有一个人问海阔天空同学，这个人像很会思考，他说人工智能中的学习不是从无到有，而是系统的自我改进，实际上是信息反馈的作用吧。这个完全是这样的啊，就是说这个尤其是这一点接通了之前的机器学习跟现有的一个联系啊，就是跟刚才之前的复杂系统和现有的机器学习的一个联系。实际上复杂系统讲到反馈，这里机器学习的这个过程也就是一个反馈的过程，信息的反馈，然后呢通过这个模型通过数据来学习，达到一个稳定的结构。然后还有一个很重要的一个冯博同学的问题啊，模拟人的大脑实现比如人脸的识别功能，这种方法有理论的基础吗？为什么神经元模型不能实现疑惑？这个也是非常经典的问题，这个两个问题就是首先呢就是说我的背景就是做计算计算神经科学的，本身呢对大脑理解就很多，确实人脸的识别呢是有大脑的这个物理基础，就是大脑基础的。就如果我们后面讲到那个卷积网络那节课的时候， 会有一个对比，就是说人脑和这个视觉的这个卷积网络的一个对比，大家会发现这里面可以说是非常惊人的一种相似性。但是就是后面的这个要讲的深度学习模型也不止于基于对于生物的一个模拟，它更多的是自身还有很多的一个优化的过程，我们也会讲解。然后讲为什么神经元模型不能实现异惑。这个问题呢，就是说异惑的这个问题呢，就是说也是我们后面课的要讲的那个要点。如果现在讲就显得有点太深了。一句话说，一个神经元代表一个线性的分类器，而要理解线性这两个字，这两个关键词的话，我们在后面几节课都会围绕它来进行。然后还有一个同学说，为什么决策树是机器学习啊？这个东西刚才另外一个同学已经说得很好了，说数据可以帮助我们形成这个决策树。用一个比喻来说，这个数据本身呢，就像一个子弹一样，它打到这个模型的毛坯上，最终把这个模型完全的塑造出来。